Christmas story you were going to tell me?
Yeah, another favorite, of course, Christmas was we play sports. I remember a bad experience. This one Christmas, I knocked up, got my nails all gone.
How old were you when that happened?
Oh, I suppose under 12.
You don't remember, really? Were you like 9 or 10, maybe?
Could have been.
I was after you were baptized.
Yeah, probably. But I don't know, because we go there quite often, so it's just...
A blur which
Yeah.
time?
And then there was the time when we were playing cricket. And in cricket, like baseball, you hit with bat and ball. You field right up close in front of people. There's a position on the left of the bat, really close, maybe 10 feet away, called silly mid-on and silly mid-off. And you field so close to the person who's batting. Of course, in cricket, they don't always hit hard. They block, and they block, and they block. They don't have to run like baseball. And so you field real close to intimidate the batter. And I got real close, and I was in front of the batter like this. And they boiled the ball down, and he stepped up and he hammered the ball, and he hit me smack in the face with the bat. I've got a scar on my lip still.
Oh, that's how you got
Christmas Day, man, that knocked me silly. I can still feel that thud. I don't think I ever got over that.
Wow, that's terrible. So how old were you? Was that the same year that you hurt your fingers?
No, but it was in that house. The house we lived in until I was about 10.
So you're 9 or so.
Could have been.
What's your earliest memory?
Of course, when I think of that yard, I think of next door. Next door we had Yugoslavs, and when I hear about the Serbs and Croats and all that these days, I think about that Yugoslav family next door. That man was the cruelest man I ever knew. His son was my best friend. His name was Peter Louis. His brother's name was Jack. But his dad looked really barbaric. One day he called us kids over to the garage, and he had found a box with a nest of mice in it. There was the mother mouse, and all the little mice in there. And he called us over to look, and then he took a hammer and he just smashed them all up with a hammer in front of us kids. God, it's really crude.
That's terrible.
Not long after that, he didn't like South Africa, and he went back to Yugoslavia. Couldn't imagine the guy.
Now you can see how that could be happening over there, huh?
Yeah, I understand how vicious they are.
What's your earliest memory?
My earliest memory is living on the north end of town. The suburb was called Geduld,
And this is in Johannesburg?
Springs.
Spring.
About 30 miles from Johannesburg. Geduld, and I think Geduld means patience. It's the name of the suburb. And I remember those are the days, of course, I still had braces, metal braces on my legs. And I remember wanting to get into things. And there was in the sidewalk, there was a tree surrounded by a fence to protect the tree. And I wanted to get inside the fence. So I climbed up and wiggled over and got inside the fence, and the policeman caught me.
How old were you?
I was probably 4 or 5, maybe 3, I don't know. Really young.
Pretty young, huh? What did he do to you?
He treated me like I was a criminal.
Did he really?
I mean, he made me feel like I was really
Terrible.
bad. I'd broken the law. And I just don't know why you want to get behind a fence, but I wanted to. My mother used to worry about that place because we were right on the edge of what we call the veld. Fields, open fields. And there was a small lake out there. And when I disappeared, they'd worry that something would happen to me over there. My friend across the street and I, we like to do fun, weird things. And people there have rain storage tanks, sometimes underground. And they had one in their yard. And we got one of these little train sets with rails. And we opened the thing, we let it ride right into the tank. Gone. All good. Those are the kind of things I remember doing. It was scary when I was there because I remember we had a native maid, a black, and she was taking care of us. And folks were gone one night, and a guy came after her and chased her through the house with an axe, chopped her in her knee, and she went out to her back room, and her room was barred, and she locked it. So we were in the house, and she was in her room out the back, and this guy was trying to get in with an axe.
Oh my word.
That's about all I remember.
You don't remember if did she get fixed?
Yeah, yeah. I don't
And like
remember what happened in the incident, but I remember we all got over it, but it was kind of scary. We
Yeah.
were just little kids.
Oh gee.
I always thought my knee kind of looked flat. No, I don't think this is the truth, but I know there was a time when I fell out my uncle's car. He had a 1937, a green Chev, and I went to sleep in the back on the door handle. And we were going past one mine where the road curved like that, and I leaned on it, and it just threw me right out. The door opened, and I knocked me unconscious. I woke up and we got home about 10 miles away. My knee was all messed up.
Ow.
But, so that was Geduld. While we lived there, next door to us, a young man who was a very good boxer. And the Royal Air Force, because I'd have been 3 then, Royal Air Force sent a boxing team to South Africa, and they toured around, and this guy was a really good boxer, and they recruited him. He went to England, and he became a Battle of Britain pilot. He was an ace. He was featured on American magazines.
Wow.
War ace. And then later on he came back, he married a lady, Yvonne Cox, and they came back to South Africa on a vacation, and he ran into the missionaries and got converted, joined the church, and we had him speak at firesides.
Oh,
He was from
cool.
next door to Geduld.
That's cool. Where was it that you would stand on the piano and climb on the piano and stuff like that? Scare
Well,
Granny
we
half
didn't
to
have
death.
a piano, but my grandma had a piano, and I guess, because I don't remember that, but that would be at my grandma's house, because she's the one who had the piano.
Oh, so you'd stand on that and scare your mom half to death. Maybe
Yeah.
tell like where you were born and when and what happened.
I don't remember much about even the stories about being born. I don't remember anything about being born. I think the first stories are that when I was 11 months old and had polio.
Right.
First week I walked.
Oh, the first week you walked, you got
I
polio.
walked, and then I got polio. And it was 3 years before I walked again.
Wow.
Oh, I was 3.
When
I
you
don't know
walked.
how long it was.
Right.
And it was the end of the Depression. My dad had not had work. He'd even kind of lived off my mother's folks. They lived out on the farm. And then things started to open up on the mines. They got married. My mom and dad got married and moved up to the Transvaal, to the gold mines. And then their whole family followed up, except for the one sister, the one who was not active.
What was her
Stayed
name?
down there. Aunt Muriel. She always treated me like her favorite. She was always good to me. Aunt Muriel. Her husband was not a member. His name was Buster. I always remember him and my dad working on a car one day, and they both working at the same time, and I was quite a lesson. My dad pulled a wrench and it slipped off, and his hand jumped like this, and some bolts, a sharp edge of a bolt stick, and it just ripped a whole lot of flesh out. And all he did was go. A little while later, my uncle wrapped his knuckles, didn't he, and hurt himself nearly as bad as my dad, and he let out all kind of oaths. Just as a little kid, I noticed the difference between my dad, who was a member, and my uncle, who wasn't.
Right.
It was a really strong lesson for me. But the polio experience, because I don't really remember it, but I remember seeing the pictures and I remember the stories they told me. Because infantile paralysis, as they called it, then they didn't know what they were doing. They tied me to a board, a padded leather board, and then they brought me home on the board, and my grandmother said, "That's stupid," so she took my arm out.
Right.
But before she did, I had long curly hair, and I used to pull my hair out. And the legs, they left in the strapped down, and so my right leg didn't get to exercise. My left arm I exercised, and so it.
She saved
I
that.
had cross paralysis, left arm, right leg.
Mhm.
And I know my mom went through a lot. It was real testing, I suppose, because I have great memories of my dad from that, because it was kind of mixed, bless him. He worked on the mines. His hands were really rough from working all the time out there in the cold and stuff. And he'd come home every night, and those rough hands, he would massage my legs. He'd get olive oil and just massage my legs.
Mm-hmm.
My ankles, my right ankle just hung like this. I didn't even have an ankle, it was just a straight ankle. And he would work it, massage it, try to keep it stimulated, and then when he put in the braces to hold it up, but I can still feel his rough hands.
That's cool.
Rough but tender. And it brought me really close to my parents, because at that early age, got a lot of attention. The war started when I was 3 years old. Three of my uncles went up what we called up north,
Mm-hmm.
which meant they were in the war in North Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a tough time. They were in trenches for nights in the mud and in the water, and affected their kidneys, and they had quite an experience. But I'd always want to know what was going on, and the headlines would come out in the paper. So I learned to read early because I wanted to read the news.
Uh-huh. Wow.
So that kind of stimulated my interest in reading. I couldn't wait for somebody else to tell me the news. I wanted to read it. So by the time I got to school, I was quite advanced in reading.
How old were you when Marlene was born?
4.
Okay, go ahead. Or your grandparents. You can even talk about your dad, his situation.
Well, my mom's grandparents, I grew up with. My dad's parents, mother and stepfather, lived 400 miles away, so we hardly ever saw them. But my mom's grandparents, my grandparents on my mom's side were in our hometown. We lived about 3 miles from most of the time I grew up. I think of my grandmother, first thing that comes to mind is cucumbers in vinegar and onions. Seems like they were always on the table.
Mm-hmm.
They had a pool table. We used to play pool there. We didn't really play American pool, we played snooker and billiards. Sometimes we'd buy toy cigars and act like we were gangsters. Well, I'd like to visit my grandma's house, but I had a hang up about going in because I didn't like going to the bathroom. The bathroom was outside, outdoors. It wasn't it wasn't
An outhouse.
It was plumbing, but it was outside the house, and you had to walk about 20 feet from her back door to the thing. And they had a watchdog in the backyard, a Doberman Pinscher on the end of a chain. And the chain reached just almost to the path. And you wait for that dog, looked like he wasn't watching and he was napping, and you just dart for it. And you wouldn't hear anything, and all of a sudden he would come for you.
Oh, gee.
Just be close to you, like 6
Then
inches.
you wouldn't make it to the bathroom.
6 inches away.
Scare you to death.
It seemed like I couldn't understand why I never got bit. I mean, certain parts of the path you could reach, just the end and then he'd be there and you couldn't get back. He'd sit there.
Stressful.
I just hated Doberman pinchers because of that. I think of my grandfather. He was a quiet, very quiet old man, and he would paint, and he was meticulous in painting, and he would do, this normal painting, but he always did the baseboards and the woodwork kind of for antiquing and stuff, and he was immaculate, and he was always well clean. The smell of paint is kind of clean. But he'd sit in a little stool or chair by the front door in late afternoon and smoke his pipe. But he was a good man. He never talked, never ever had a chat with him. It seems like the last thing I remember is his funeral. All his daughters were crying and stuff, and were sad that he had died. He didn't live very long after my grandmother died. It seems like I could hear him at the funeral chuckling. His daughters thinking, this is really funny. It seemed like he was interesting grandfather. I remember pictures of him as a young man in uniform with moustache, hat, and blue uniform of some kind. He was in the government services for years. He was a stock inspector, and he would leave the part of the country where they lived, which was in what they called border. It's the border between the Cape and Natal. In between, there's a native territory, and on the edge of the native territory is a place called Border. He would leave that and go for months on stock inspections. He had a horse, Starlight was his horse, and he would go and inspect settlements where they would have to fight pests. They'd have to run their animals through a dipping trough, sheep and stuff. And he would be there to see that they did it. He'd go north to the Kalahari Desert and he'd come back with stories about the Bushmen and stories about little streams full of sapphires and rubies, and he'd bring them back for his family. And
Really? Wow.
he talked about skirting around trees with big branches, and the snakes were so long, big pythons on the end, that the branches would hang down to the ground with the snakes on the branches. He talked about losing his horse in the Kalahari Desert. He got up in the morning and the horse had strayed away in the night. And where do you find it? And so he'd find a bushman, give him some chewing tobacco. The bushman would take off and he'd just run around in circles, getting wider and wider and wider, and suddenly he'd go. And he'd come back an hour or so later, pulling the horse. And the horse would be, he'd be running and the horse would be all sweating. Instead of bushman bringing it back. So I was always interested in the Kalahari Desert. There was a myth about the lost city of the Kalahari. Some American explorer had come back with some sketches of what he thought was the lost city of the Kalahari. Always wanted to go to the Kalahari Desert. And then a man came in when I was 15, the surgeon that I got interested in got quite famous because he was out, and that was his hobby, was in his spare time exploring the Kalahari looking for the lost city. And one time he was in this one place searching and he got attacked. In fact, my surgery was delayed because he got his arm bitten by a baboon.
Wow.
Of course, I grew up with all the baboon stories. And another place I liked to camp was a place called Heidelberg. There was a little college town. Next to it was a big ravine with cliffs and lots of bush and shrubbery. And I would like to go camping there. The cliffs were full of baboons. They bark and make noises at night. All young 12-year-olds. We would go camping when we were 12, 13 years old without any adults. And it was kind of scary. I remember those days. A strange thing would happen when we get out there. Just because there was no adults around, we'd all start swearing, and we'd never sworn. Then we'd start to feel guilty and we'd stop swearing.
That's funny. Oh,
That's
God.
Ken Armstrong, the mission president, and Noel Fudder, the bishop in Cape Town, and Win Armstrong, the bishop in Springs, and me, the four of us cussing.
That's a funny story. I can't even imagine it. Oh.
When you talk about funny stories, that reminds me of me buying my first car.
From the blind man?
Yeah. There was this man from Scotland in the church, and he had an old DKW. And this would have been in the 50s. And they would talk about these old German cars that were made in the 30s. They were steel frame body, and then the chassis, and then tin and wood and canvas made up the rest of the body. These DKWs, which means the German car works, but DKW, we call the Data Klein Warner, which means the German small wanderer. But they were kind of a myth that they just ran forever. And I thought, if I'm going to buy a car, that's what I'll buy. So I scout around, I find out this lineman has one. So I go out to his place, and this car is immaculate. He's painted it and everything. And he just come back from a 700-mile trip in it, one way. He'd done it 2 ways. So he takes me out, and it's getting late in the evening when we go out. I see it's nice and shiny and everything, and it starts. and he'd give me a spare engine if I buy it. He takes me into his workshop. Doesn't have a light in there. So in the dark, he's showing me this engine that I can have in case I ever need another engine. So I was really uneasy about it, and I was just learning to shop. And my dad's the kind who didn't like dickering or anything. He just wanted to get done with it, and he pushed me into buying it.
How much was it?
I think I can't remember now because the money's changed so much in my life, but it seems like it was 400 something.
Whatever the money was then, 400.
Those days we had pounds.
So how much money would have that been worth?
At the time that would have been $1,200.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. And I didn't have much, so it cleaned me out. Going home, I was driving down the highway and I went to change gears and the gear shift came out in my hands. I tried to remember the gear shift in my hands. Came right out of the dash.
Holy cow.
This was kind of a station wagon, pickup van type
Come back
thing.
at Studebaker.
Oh, this was, no, this, it looked like a pickup with a shell on the back. Old-fashioned pickup.
Right.
So I had to stop and in the dark try and figure things out, and I found out that the way the linkage was held together was just by a piece of conveyor belt rubber. Because the thing only had about 3 gears, so it was only it was a 3-cylinder 2-stroke. No, 2-cylinder 2-stroke. And I soon learned how to just put that back in and not to pull too hard when I went to change gears.
So you left that to your parents when you went on your mission?
I kind of had a dream of making a racing car out of it.
You know, it's funny to hear Dad say all this stuff because I think now I see where we get a lot of what we are from him, because we're a lot like you were when you were a kid, huh?
And of course, I had that adventure taking all the kids to youth conference where we loaded everybody up to go to Johannesburg, 30 miles away, big expedition. I pulled into a gas station and there were some blacks there and they didn't know peanuts, and I just said, I want to make sure I've got enough oil in this thing. So put oil in it. I didn't even know that a 2-stroke, you didn't put oil in the crankcase. The oil came in your gas. Your gas has oil in it. You'd go to special pumps that would give you gas that had oil in it. But I want to make sure I have enough oil in my crankcase. You don't put it because the oil in a 2-stroke, the gas runs through the crankcase and it actually lubricates the parts that are in there as it gets sucked into the engine. That's how it lubes. There's never any crankcase to take oil out or put oil in. It's just the gas lubes it as it's running through this whole system. It just sucks it in. They don't have any valves. It just opens at the right place and it sucks the air and creates a vacuum and so on. Well, we had this guy put in. I said, this is a gear, a crankcase. I want heavy oil in there, good oil. So they put differential oil in there, which is 90 weight. And I took off down the street, and this heavy black oil was getting sucked into the engine and burned. So I leave this big cloud of black smoke behind me. No cars could pass me. With all these kids hanging out. I just lucky I never ran into a policeman. But it was just like our gang with all these weird guys, and we went to a conference. When I came back, I decided I wanted it streamlined, so I stripped the body down. I was going to put a streamlined metal body on it and use it for a sports car. That's Brian and them would get the other little blacks to help him, and they'd push it and start it and ride up and down the back lane. Down. He learned to drive in that thing because the back alley was all gravel, nice white gravel road. You go down the end and spin it around and come up and spin it around.
How old was he?
He'd been about 12 when he did this. He had his own business when he was 11. He'd buy the rich kids' bicycles when they got new bikes. He'd buy the old ones for like 30, 40 cents. And then he'd clean them up, refurbish them, paint them, and sell them to the blacks for $10.
Smart.
So that was his business.
Where are you going, Timo?
Okay, my dad's parents. Earliest information that I know about them is that they moved to the city of Windhoek, which really means windy corner. Windhoek, in what was then known as German West Africa. It became Southwest Africa after the First World War.
You're on.
So my grandfather was a successful railroad administrator, and I don't know what he was worth, but apparently he handled his affairs well and was worth quite a bit. And then in the flu epidemic of 1918, he died. The worldwide flu influenza epidemic. Don't know a whole lot about him except that he was a man whose punctuality was what he was known for. And was so important that there's a story about my grandmother being late for a train, and so he took the train without her. And that's about all I know about him. My grandmother was a very saintly lady. She was one of those who was just faithful, as you can imagine, and treated her husband with super respect. And in the strong patriarchal system of the Dutch down there in South Africa, she was... I feel like I'm there in South Africa. Which flies me. She was a perfect example of the ideal wife. The first earliest story I know about her was to do with my dad. When he was 7 years old, he was dying. I don't know what he was dying of, but they didn't have much hope left for him. And she pleaded with the Lord and committed him to the Lord, that if the Lord would preserve his life, it was her only child. She would bring him up to be a minister in the church. At that time, the Dutch Reformed Church was the one they belonged to. It was a strong traditional church of the pioneers of the Dutch people. And my father survived, and so she always had in mind that he would be a righteous person and she would do all she can. It was kind of stressful for her when he left the Dutch Reformed Church after he met my mother. And it's like she felt like a failure, I think, at first, because this was a strange church that he was joining. But later on, it became apparent to her, and she found out what he was doing, that he really was serving the Lord. He really was a minister at this time in the Lord's church.
Mm-hmm.
Turned out to be a positive thing. My grandfather died in, Opa Louw died in 1918. And sometime after that, she married a widower. Her name was Cook. I don't know what his first name was. And interesting, she married a man with the name Cook. And she was really from the Dutch, and the Dutch were not that positive towards the English. But I suspect he may have been Scottish, because when the British took over the Cape from the Dutch, when Napoleon conquered Europe around the beginning of the 19th century, then the Dutch people could not get ministers for their church from Holland anymore. They would get them from Scotland. So you find a lot of Presbyterian ministers coming down to South Africa to take over run the churches. And to this day you find people with names that start Mac who don't speak with an English accent at all. Because the Dutch, the Presbyterians were Calvinistic in their religion. And so it was easy for them to connect. But at the same time, the Scottish didn't like the English, so they had a lot more in common with the Dutch than they had with the English.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps Cook was from Scottish Presbyterians or something, I don't know. It really surprised me that she would. But I was too young to know, never heard any discussion of it. And they moved from Southwest Africa across the country north of where my dad first moved to. He came to a place called East London where he met my mother. They went way further north than that, to a place called Durban. And that's where they lived the rest of their lives. Kind of a subtropical area. I remember visiting there, and the kindest my grandmother was, that step-grandfather was really harsh. And he had 2 children by my grandmother. One who became a professional wrestler, cyclone cook, and the other one, Irene, Aunt Irene. And my uncle was kind of a rough character. He worked on the railroads. My aunt was very, very capable, articulate, fluent in English and Afrikaans, and impressive woman.
Mm-hmm.
She just died 2 or 3 years ago. Aunt Irene, redhead, deep dark red. But I remember visiting that home, and that stepfather, he had a son who at one time was the mayor of a small city in that province where they were. And he had a son. His name was Vicky. And Vicky had a little toy gun that would kind of shoot toothpicks or popsicle sticks or something. And I shot him in the face. And it wasn't because I was mad at him, it was an accident. I shot him in the cheek. And created quite a hubbub. And that step-grandfather thrashed me for that. So I also got in trouble one more time when I visited there. I lived up in the gold mines, up on the high plateau where there were very few trees and mainly grassland. And I'd go to visit my grandma. It was subtropical, and she had banana trees growing in her really banana, don't call them trees, but kind of a palm tree, the banana tree.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a hold of a kitchen knife, and I was tossing out there, and the trees are this thick, but they're soft. And so I stabbed the tree, and I just attacked it. Next morning, the tree had broken in half. And ruined the banana tree.
Oh no.
So that was like the couch I attacked.
Right. Bolero.
So much fun playing toys in the banana orchard.
Sounds like something Taryn would do.
Anyway, that's about all I had experience with them. And then my grandmother died when I was about 12 years old. And at that time we were struggling financially. Folks didn't have hardly anything. We ate well and we dressed nicely. We didn't have a car, which was in our neighborhood. We stayed in a very nice home. We were the only people without a car. I was the only kid in the neighborhood who didn't have a bike. Well, I did get a bike somewhere. I got a bike, and instead of tires on it, it had the hose
Garden
They-
hose.
Yeah, we used to have old garden hoses, heavy ones, and I remember it had a garden hose around and a big wire staple in it. And then, so you had a joint there when you rode the bike, and you'd hit that bump every time when it come around. Boom, 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 boom. I don't remember where that bike came from, but anyway, under these conditions where we were really struggling economically, the my grandmother dies and my dad goes down to a funeral and finds out that his father's wealth is still all in his mother's name. You know, I don't know how wealthy they were because they didn't live in a huge house or anything. They were very conservative, just in a nice middle class home. But we found out everything was in my grandmother's name. She'd never put it in her husband's name. And my dad was
Heir. The only.
only heir to his father. And my father, being the kind he was, he just, he could have taken everything. This man was, I think he was a retired railroad worker. So he had his little pension. He owned nothing. In fact, for some time he had really lived off of my grandmother. For some reason, she had never put everything in his name. Maybe she didn't expect to die before him. And then she would have left it all to my dad. But my dad just signed everything over to him. And Vicky, the guy shot in the cheek, who was a real reprobate, from what I understood. His dad was a mayor, but there was some unsavory things supposedly about him. Vicky left his dad, came stayed with Grandpa Cook. Grandpa Cook's own kids detested him, the ones that he'd had by my grandmother. And my dad wouldn't take anything, but they went and snooped around and they stole some stuff, silverware. And told him he had to keep this as family heirloom stuff, and it didn't belong to his side of the family. It belonged to the Louws. That was his own children who did that. They had no respect for him at all.
But they respected Grandpa.
He had, all his brothers really liked him. He was a likable person. So there was no feeling between him and them. But anyway, so the last we knew is that this Vicky was
Soaking him.
living off of his granddad. And really, what my folks could have had. Didn't have a car. We lived out of town. We rode bicycles. Dad was the district president, and he'd have to ride a bicycle 5 miles into town to catch a train to
Sharon, be careful.
do his church work. It'd be nice if he could have had a car.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's kind of where that story ends. There's some rumors right now that money, there's still money in that estate.
Really?
And Beverly has said this, the Louws still say there's money in that estate. Relatives of my grandfather. And they would really like the family to get it back. But, my dad kind of taught them a few things that way, what was most important. So, I think that's as much as I can recall about my grandmother. Her name was Sophia, Elizabeth Sophia Duplessis. French ancestry. So, after my grandmother married Cook, he made life so miserable for my dad that when he was in a senior in high school, couldn't take it anymore. So he dropped out of school, he left home, became an apprentice fitter and turner on the railroad, which means a kind of a mechanic and machinist. which was a very, very low economic position to be as an apprentice on the railway. He lived on coffee and black bread for some time. Then got transferred from southwest German, West Africa to East London, where the people were very English. Loved sports, was active in his church, became a teacher in his church, Dutch Reformed Church. But in sports he met some guys playing soccer who invited him after soccer to come home to their home for some kind of party they were going to have after the game. And then he saw my mother for the first time and was stunned, told the person who was with him, I'm going to marry her. He didn't know how hard it would be, but he was convinced that it would happen. She was 16 at the time. They didn't marry her until 4 years later. Later that year, he proposed to her and she laughed at him. Couldn't understand why, and she explained she was a Mormon. Never even heard of Mormons. And he had been faithful in his church. But, Tara, don't go down the stairs. Anyway, he'd been faithful in his church, but he'd always been haunted by some things about his church.
About some water and milk.
Water and milk. Boy, you don't have to be thirsty, huh?
Stupid.
You're not going to be thirsty, are you?
Why don't you go in the kitchen and drink that and then go downstairs? Okay, go ahead.
Well, when he was young and his folks lived not up there but lived down in Ceres, a place near Ceres, near Cape Town, where it's can be quite rainy in the winter times. They had a neighbor. Neighbors on a neighbouring farm had a baby, and the baby was really weak and ill, and they were worried about the baby and afraid it wasn't going to live, so they sent a message for the minister to come, because in the Dutch Reformed Church, if the baby isn't christened before it dies, it's doomed. And before the minister could get there, they'd had a heavy downpour and there was a flash flood. The bridge was washed out and he couldn't cross the river. It took another day before he could get there, and meanwhile the baby died. When he arrived and found the baby had died, he refused to bury it and said it was doomed to hell, and that God had predestinated it to take place, and there wasn't anything they could do about it, because if God wanted the baby to come to heaven, he would have kept it alive. And that had always haunted him, and that was the wedge that my mother was able to use to actually shear him away from the church that he'd grown up in, always been faithful to, and his mother wanted him to be a minister. And as a minister in a Dutch Reformed Church, the title for a minister is Dominee, which means master. And they are the very powerful people in the community. They have tremendous influence and are held in high regard and respect. So, anyway, he became interested in the church. In those days, they used to have Book of Mormon reading competitions in the branches throughout the mission. And their little area had a motto, watch our dust. And he got caught up in this thing, and soon he was caught up in the church too. So he joined the church, and because of course this is all happening now just as the Depression hits. My folks live on a little farm and they're eking out an existence, and he finds himself out of work. And he's having to scrounge for them. And as the peak of the depression starts to subside. In 1934, December 1934, they were married, and he had the promise of a job about 700 miles away near Johannesburg on the mines, a place called Springs. So they got married and got on the train, left, and lived in Springs from 1936 until 1960. 24 years they were there. Springs was a little mining town. Later on, it went on to produce 1/3 of the 3 world's gold.
Wow.
And it had, as I was growing up in it, there was somewhere between 30 and 40,000 white people. Nobody had any idea how many black people there were. Because he right then became the branch president and stayed branch president for 14 years. A little more than a year after they were married, I was born. And by that time, most of the family moved up to come and live in that area. My mother's family, grandmother had 10 children, one of which died of appendicitis. His name was Temple of Ten. About 12 years old, I think, when he died of appendicitis. Except for one aunt who stayed down there, married out of the church. The rest of the family moved up and became the nucleus of the Springs branch for a good many years. And Bishop in Springs branch right now is one of the grandchildren. So where do you go from there? Thinking about things that would fire my imagination. Growing up, that's when I say growing up, I mean when you reach the point where you start to be able to learn to read, go to school and stuff, 6 years old, and so on. Reading opens up a whole world to you. And the family always gave me books to read, and I don't see the same. Maybe they had it here in America. The British really publish a lot of stuff for kids. Tons of stuff for kids. And a lot of it's related to the wars. But whenever I was sick or anything, the thing was always, you always got books. And it would be about some famous squadron or something like that. And they're comics, we call them comics. They didn't have any pictures. They were actually written stories about heroes during the war. And I remember one that was one of my favorites. He was a boxer. There would always be boxing tournaments as well as stories about flying, getting shot down, and even getting in a boxing tournament in a prison camp and fighting the guards. And my favorite hero was Rockfist Rogan. Rockfist Rogan. There were, a thing that was really popular for us in comics was motorcycle racing, dirt track, cinder track, where they ride flat out and they just hit the corners like this. It's just breathtaking. And they have steel on their boot and they slide around the corner. Anyway, those are the kind of people that would get me excited, and of course I had quite an imagination, fantasized a lot about those kinds of things. I remember going to the movies, and the guy who got me really excited was the Phantom.
From Phantom of the Opera?
No.
Oh.
This was the Phantom. The Phantom was a kind of a Tarzan guy, but he wore a mask. He was kind of dressed like Batman. He didn't have a cape, but he was masked. And he lived in the jungle. And I eventually got myself, I had my own black outfit. And I would slink out at night. Just slink around. When I was 15, 16 years old, I'd still slink out night. I had this black outfit, and I'd be on the prowl looking for some wrong to right. And I don't know if I told you, but I'd see the older high school kids having dances in the rec center, in the recreation center, and they'd be making out like crazy, and it would just disgust me. They'd be dancing, hugging close and stuff, and then in the annex to the building, they'd go out in there, and there were just rolls of carpet there, but they would just sort of use them as a couch, and would be making out in there, and this just would just really disturb me. And so when they would have a dance, I would go there to thwart what was going on. I would be up on the roof. The building was shaped like this, quite high. And there's a roof along here, and on the sides of the dance floor, here's where they'd have refreshments and tables and stuff. But there were windows like this, and I could reach into here. And to work these windows, there were cords for them to open and close the windows. I think it was the windows or the drapes, but I would reach in and pull the cords up. And I'd throw the cords out into the entanglement of the people who were dancing, who were smooching. And then I would sneak into the annex when they were dancing, when there was nobody in there, and I would do various things. I would climb up in it, because it had no ceiling, this building, with just a roof with big raw beams. And I'd get up in the beams in my black outfit. And then the kids would come in there and sort of sneak in there, and then they'd start to sit down and start necking. And they just kept working up, and then I would start to laugh out loud. Just hideous cackling. Just ruined the whole atmosphere for the kind of things they were doing. And I found out that if you took Reckitt's washing glue, the stuff you put in washing to make stuff white, and hollow it out, and you pour vinegar in there, it produces a really distasteful odor. So I would also make stink bombs in there, so that it was just too unpleasant to go in there and make out. Anyway,
How old were you when you did that?
well, it was 13 to 15, maybe even 16. That was sort of my secret identity. When I was senior in high school, my neighbor next door, his folks went on vacation, so he planned a big whooping party at his house. Invited me to come. And I came there, and they had the lights real dim, and they were necking like crazy, dancing, slow dances. And in the bedroom, they were looking at Playboy magazines and stuff, giggling and so on. I couldn't stand this. It just would drive me balmy. So the way they worked the lights in the house, they were trip switches for not the same kind you have here, for the fuse boxes. I knew that I would just turn the lights on and off, and nobody would really, there'd be a kind of a flicker. This way I could tell which switch worked which lights. And then I turned off the lights where they were dancing, because they had them off anyway. The only light in there was the radio, coming out of the radio, the record player. But I switched off, so if they tried to turn the lights on, they couldn't get them on. And then I found a big spray can of insecticide, which is really not very nice to smell. And then I slunk into this room where they were all smooching around, and I started to
Pump that in.
I could see them dimly, and I just started shooting into each couple of the stuff. And then they get frantic, and they try to put the lights on, and they come after me, and then I just hand somebody the can, and then he'd get whipped. Because they'd catch him in the can, and I'd get out. That was my other identity. Nobody ever knew who did that.
You're not nobody in your family even.
No.
That is so funny.
I think I probably talked about making bombs and rockets, haven't I? That was my other idea. It's kind of scary at times because there were occasionally I would befriend somebody who'd want to know, well, what do you do around here? And I'd show him what I do. And every afternoon, the miners, everybody from the mine, not everybody, but many of the men would come down to the bowling green and bowl from 4 o'clock till about 6:30 and have a few beers before they go home. And the bowling club was a really popular centre. And every now and then the bowling club would have some kind of a banquet, awards and stuff. And they'd have a lot of good food there and a lot of liquor. And the food wouldn't get eaten, but the liquor would get drunk. I used to like to go in after a party because they wouldn't even clean up. Just turn the lights out. Somebody had to come in the next morning and clean up. And I'd get in through the roof and get in through the windows and get in and eat the leftovers.
That's funny.
Lots of potato chips.
You were sneaking around a lot, weren't you?
And you had to be kind of sly to survive in some of this.
Yeah.
I think I told you how I survived the guys who beat me up.
Yeah, you've told me, but I don't think it's on video.
Because when I was younger, we'd love to go over to the mine dumps where they have the big junkyard where they just throw junk and stuff and go scrounging around looking for interesting bits of things and stuff there. Maybe find a piece of leather or a piece of canvas.
You want to drive my car?
Make something with.
You want to drive my car?
Mm-hmm.
But occasionally you'd find something that would come up from underground that had something to do with the explosives they use. Because they would drill into the rock and then they ram dynamite in and then they ram or slide carefully in a little aluminum capsule about this long called a detonator. And then coming out of it would be the fuse.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd find pieces of detonators or pieces of fuses or stuff like that. And sometimes the big chunk pieces of crayon that they would use to mark lumber with and stuff. And sometimes we even found a complete detonator. And we'd find a big clod of dirt with antler holes in it. Put the detonator in and light it and just blow it. There were kids who lost hands through that, playing with detonators, because they go off real easy. So we were real careful with that, but when we were older kids who would beat me up, I found out the way to intimidate them was to have a fuse in my pocket or something and say, do you want to see what I have in my pocket? And he'd say, what do you mean? And I'd say, well, I've just been down and mined up. And I know you wouldn't like what I have in my pocket. And the bluff was on. They never ever challenged my bluff.
Why did they beat you up?
I suppose it's because I wasn't Catholic. There were a couple of reasons. They sort of belonged to groups. They're kind of like gangs. Not strict gangs like you have here now.
Right.
But they were friends who together. I remember the first time one of the earliest times I got beaten up, there was a kid who I think went to church with these other kids. At school, we'd have recess, and at the end of recess, the bell would go, you had to go line up outside the school, out there in the yard, playground. And the principal always kind of stand on the balcony and make announcements, and then we'd go to class. And there was this one kid, his name was Fuss, F-U-S-S, his last name was Fuss. His dad was Swiss, I think, and they had a Swiss watch place. He would always be first in line. always. He'd go eat his lunch in line so that he could be first. And one day I got in line before he did. And it just ruined his whole day, so he hit me with his lunch tin. Cracked me on the head with it. Lunch tin like this, and he just hit me right here on the head, and I bled even. I'm taking his name is Louw Fuss. I remember that. Louw. R-A-O-U-L. Louw Fuss. So I waited for him after school, and I beat him up. He was bigger than me, but he was really,
Weenie.
yeah. Anyway, so he told some of his friends, so then his friends got their older brother,
Oh, God.
and he really fixed me good. It's like, so, other time I remember one of those guys had a long, thin wire. We wore shorts to school in the winter time. I remember them picking on me and whipping me with wire. Go around your legs, pull that would really sting. It would just sting you. Wire whip, very fine wire. Didn't cut you, but it, little kids aren't that strong, but it would.
Welt you.
So I never really belonged to the in-group at school. I remember there was a serial in the movies. Every week they'd show another chapter of it, like this Star Trek, not Star like Star Trek, but it was the equivalent of the Tarzan movies. There was Nyoka, Jungle Girl.
Oh.
And somehow I never could make it into the in-group.
It's for you, Daddy.
Okay.
I remember the smartest girl in the school was always got to be Nyoka, because in recess they always played Nyoka, and I never got included in it. Never was part of the game, so I was always on the outside looking in. I had my own gang though, outside of school. We had our dugout, we had our fort, we called it, where you dug a hole down in the ground in a tunnel, and then you had a room underneath there. And I got in trouble once. I really got bad trouble. We were always trying to raise money and buy and sell things. And I remember one time some of the guys, they were loyal to me, so they'd do anything to raise money. We were in a store and they stole stuff. We got caught. I didn't do the stealing, but they got caught with me going out, so that wasn't so serious. The other time was one of them stole some colored crayons, pencils, at school, and he brought them to the fort, and I didn't want them there, so I sold them, because I didn't want stolen stuff. So I sold the stolen stuff, so I wouldn't have any bad conscience. The principal found out, he traced the whole thing down, they found out who was responsible, and we got caned.
Really?
The principal actually had a cane. It wasn't the round cane like this. They carve it, they make it smooth, like this, flat. And I got caned. The guy who got me in trouble there, the swiping and stuff, I got in trouble once. I got caned once before because of him. I had like, I forget now, 28 or 30 boils on my neck. My neck was just really bad shape. And he was just a friend of mine, and he walked in and saw me in school and kind of slapped me on the back and say hi. But he hit kind of high and hit me on the neck. And the pain was just overwhelming. So I turned around and I just hit him. The teacher was walking right in the room. I just turned around and hit him, smack on the nose, the blood just came roaring out. Sounds sort of militant in this tape, don't it?
You sound a bit intense. You sound a lot like Charles.
Principal and the teacher saw me and he thought we were in a big fight. We weren't really in a fight. I mean, he was my best friend.
Right.
And he
So didn't you hang out with him at school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
What was his
when I
name?
say he's my best friend, at that time he was my best friend.
Right.
Actually, it was his older brother that hammered me for beating that other kid.
Oh, really?
Because they were really closer connected. But at this particular time, this was later on. When we were younger, we weren't friends. But at the time when we got in trouble, we were friends. When I had a fort, I
Uh-huh.
was probably 10 or 11 years old. And so, but I was always had I always had my own secret group. Just 2 or 3 guys. Can I tell you about the time one of the group told secrets on us?
Uh-uh.
I had a little room out behind our garage. There was some spare rooms, just like a really nice, brick. This is brick, but it's a shed. And I had a prison, and I even had a chain nailed to the door frame, and I had a metal thing to go around your hand. And one guy in the gang told somebody that I had this stuff. So he had revealed a big secret. It's interesting how the secret combination thing can come through little kids. And he revealed the secret, so we went and got him. We brought him back and we put him in chains. We pinched him for telling the big secrets. This is before I was baptized.
I get. Oh wow, you're just little then.
That's right. You may think this is humorous, but I want to tell you that, behold, I have dreamed a dream. I've seen a vision. What I saw was a kingdom long, long time ago. And there were many happy people there. And they really enjoyed life. And wondered if it could ever be any better. And they lived on a kingdom on the edge of a great ocean. And they lived on the top of a great cliff where they could see out over the ocean. And then they, through light, found out that there was across the ocean another land with people who were much happier than they were. And they wanted to be happy like those people. And they found out that to be happy like those people, they had to go down the cliff to a beach that was below. And there, wait for a ship to come and pick them up. The only way down the cliff was to go down a waterfall. And they had to ride the waterfall, which took fate. And then they arrived on the side of a beach, a beautiful beach. And they were given strict instructions. They were told that the water will sometimes come very high on the beach and they should be very careful because the water would sweep them out. But they were to watch for the day when the ship would come. Another thing they were told is they were supposed to stay together and hold each other's hands while when they'd go around, so that if a wave did come in to take any of them, the others would be able to hold that person so they wouldn't get swept away. And they didn't know when the ship would come in. And they spent a long time on this beach at the bottom of the cliff. And sometimes the water would come so high, it would be very difficult for them and they'd have to get way back. And some were swept away by the water. Other times the water wasn't dangerous and the water was enjoyable, and they even learned to play in the water and enjoy coming in with the waves. But then one day the ship came for them, and they were glad that they had followed the instructions. And the ship took them to the other land, where they found out that everything that they'd been promised was really as wonderful and even more wonderful than they could have imagined. this is perhaps the parable of the allegory of the water. While they were on the beach, most of the people on the beach complained about the water. Most of the people on the beach felt that the water was their enemy. But there were those who realized that it was on the water that they were going to have to travel. And so they were grateful for the water, because that very water would be the thing that they would travel on to get to the promised land. And those who appreciated that also had difficulty with the water. But they never let that discourage them, and nor did they ever feel bad about the water. They recognized that in order to have the water, they had to take what came with the water. And so they had many good experiences with the water, and the bad experiences they just rode out patiently. And they found the whole experience really worthwhile, the water. They were brought to this place by water. They could never ever go back to where they came from. Ever, ever, ever. Once they came by water, there's no way to ever go back. Okay, some more memories of growing up. After we moved from where I first started going to a really nice part of town, a place called Selection Park, one of the suburbs of Springs. We were right on the edge of the homes, and there was just country out from us. There was a big farm nearby, a dairy farm, and fun things we kind of did that I recall, a good and a bad, involved going down to the dairy farm. They had a place where they would put the bones of the dead cattle. And we would take our carts down there and fill up carts with bones. And then we'd haul those bones to they're called the bone factory. It was really a place where they made glue. And
Do you know who that is? You have to start.
anyway, the bone factory was right near a big steelworks. And I remember one time we had a cart that somebody's dad had made out of steel, and the whole thing was welded. It was a steel box, steel wheels, and chains to move the front wheels. And we would take all the bones we could, and then the money we got, we went and bought slugs, where they punched out holes in heavy metal. Those slugs would come out for shooting with our catapults. I remember the bone factory really stank where they made the glue. It was a horrible smelly place. Out in that country there was I remember a willow tree that we used to hang around, been hit by lightning and it had been split in half. But it continued on, the half that was left just kept growing. Used to climb up in there and look out and see what was going on. I had 2 forts near there, where we dug down into the ground and then dug tunnels. And our fun thing to do was to scrape up enough money to go and buy strawberry pop and sweetened condensed milk. and then go sit in the fort and suck a can of punch little holes in it and suck the sweetened condensed milk out and wash it down with strawberry pop.
Surprised you still have teeth.
Oh, I didn't have that many. But then, of course, we got up to mischief in some things. Had a friend whose parents were never home, so we got up to mischief in his home. His mother used to buy cigarettes in a big box. And we thought it'd be fun to... Never had smoked. This is the only day I ever tried smoking. But we opened every box. They were wrapped little boxes in a big box. We opened every box and smoked one cigarette out of each one, or lit one in each one. Just lit it, threw down. I don't think we even inhaled. And then what was left over we sold to the blacks who would come from the mine into town to buy stuff and come walk in by his place. We sold them the rest of the boxes.
What'd she think of that?
I can't remember whether she ever noticed. They used to smoke and drink a lot in that house, and I'm not sure they knew what was going on. Our other thing was to try to get in. All homes there had big water tanks for catching rainwater, probably 500-gallon tanks. And one of our escapades was to get a rope and climb down into one of those tanks. I don't know why we wanted to be inside. We'd make a noise banging on the metal walls and struggle to get out. But our most exciting thing was to go to one of the outside rooms. They had rooms outside the house for servants that weren't being used, and put our fingers into where the switches were and get electric shocks. Because there we didn't have 120, we had 240. So it'd really give you a jolt. It was really exciting to get ready to put your finger in there and you get a big shock. Lucky that's all that ever happened. I remember his house, we'd climb up above those sheds and they led to a garage, and the garage was next to the street, and all homes had these high hedges, maybe 10 feet high, thick hedges. And then some cute girls would come by, and so we'd have to show how brave we were, and we'd dive off the top of the garage into the hedge. Get all scratched up and everything. Sure didn't feel good when we got done, but it was exciting to think that they might have seen us. I remember a few times in my life growing up doing things because I thought girls were watching, and later on, when we moved away from there, I was on another mine. It was way out in the country. There'd been an old coal mine and it had closed down. There was a big dump, and from the dump there was a big cable going down. And I remember mine manager, her grandfather was the famous South African statesman, General Smuts. He was one of the charter members of the United Nations. Field Marshal Smuts, General Smuts. It was his granddaughter, and all of her sisters were all really cute. There was one I thought was really cute. I forget her name now. Maybe it was Susha or something. Her oldest sister was Katusha. And their father was a young man when he died. He was playing tennis and he had a hemorrhage of the brain on Saturday afternoon. But I remember being up on the dump, scrounging around on the old coal dump with the waste ore. The rock was high, maybe 200-300 feet high. And seeing these girls coming on their bicycles, sort of just like us, sort of just looking around sort of scrounging around. We'd ride our bikes a lot, and there was one place that we would go where it had a water cistern type thing, but it was a concrete lined, almost square with rounded corners in the ground. water storage thing. Maybe 25 feet. But it came down to the model, and it had been neglected, and there was junk and water, so there was a pool. We would ride our bikes down into it, and you had to ride like mad to stay up and not fall in the water, ride out. This is just near the mine, and I remember being up on the dump, and the girls came up on their bikes to this area, and I thought they might see me, so I started to go down the cable by hand. And it's heavy cable, and it's got a lot of tar and stuff on it. And it just took all the skin off my hands. But the dump's like this, the cable's like that. So the further you go, the further your drop is. And it gets so high that you can't let go, you will kill yourself. And you just have to stay on and keep going. And your hand is like hamburger and you're going down. And they don't even see you.
Oh no.
Then of course my tree house, at the next vine I lived at, I built a tree house. We had these big eucalyptus trees behind us. And I got old floorboards from houses that were torn down, and I nailed them across 3 trees, and then add another tree and put more across. And then that took 2 levels and put wood down and put flooring in. Trouble is, when the wind would blow, the trees didn't move evenly, so it would snap the nails off, or it would work them loose. The nails would cut holes like this. So it's constantly having to reinforce that. And then, so behind our house was a lane. Then we had a row of, they had these for windbreaks, eucalyptus trees. Then there was a field. That field was used for big fireworks display. Every year we'd celebrate on the 5th of November, commemorate the time when some guy by the name of Guy Fawkes tried to blow up the British Houses of Parliament and was caught. And he was burnt on a bonfire. And that was a major celebration. I can't understand why. So we'd always build these huge bonfires, and you have a dummy up on top of the bonfire, and you burn big bonfire, and then you usually have a big, what we call a braai vleis, which means cooked meat or barbecue. And but the mines, because we lived in the housing that was provided by the mines, and the mines would then provide the big braai vleis. They provide the huge bonfire. You have a fire piled up high. They'd spend a week building them up, maybe 50 feet high. And then they'd give us, all the kids would get free fireworks, bags of fireworks. You go and line up and get your bag of fireworks. And every now and then somebody would be careless or, sabotage. And they'd also have the big display. They'd have these boxes where they'd put on the big stuff. I remember one night where the box got on fire with all the fireworks in. You should have seen us scatter, because there were rockets shooting out like
Straight.
this along the ground. Everything's just you're in the middle of the blow up. A friend I talked about earlier that
Smoke.
No, there was another one I talked about before. His name was Dennis Jamison. He's the one who I made his nose bleed when he accidentally hurt me.
Right.
He had fireworks in his pocket once, and somebody put something lit in his pocket, and they all went up in his pocket. It really made a mess of his leg. He got over it, but it was quite painful. Anyway, our Guy Fawkes is similar to trick and treat to Halloween. Here we'd go from door to door and we'd sing Guy Fawkes Guy, stick him in the eye, hang him on the lamppost there, let him cry.
That's a nice phrase.
We'd sing another one, Christmas is coming and the goose is getting fat, please put a penny in the old man's hat.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a penny, a halfpenny will do. If you don't have a halfpenny, God bless you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, We used to hang around the bars late on that afternoon. The drunks come out and they'd give us money to buy fireworks. So, I remember wanting to build things. I always wanted to be an explorer. I dreamt of going to South America and I designed vehicles that you could, heavy amphibians that could drive anywhere, and then they'd have a helicopter with folded propellers on the back. Then if I wanted to, I could fly up and go and scout around. So I was always drawing plans of these kinds of things. Even tried to build myself a helicopter once. I managed to, don't know where I found it, but in my scrounging around either at some dump or some place, I found a big drill race, they call them. It goes against your chest and you turn the handle and it turns the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to build a kind of a frame for it and try to use, but we make our fences with split poles there to make propellers out and tie them on somehow secure so that I can move this fast enough and maybe I could fly.
You had a good imagination.
Yeah. And, one other learning experience that was sort of negative. We had a neighbor who had really nice fruit trees, but he had a very high fence to protect his fruit trees. Like probably 10 feet high around his orchard. And that just became really tempting to us, and so we climbed the fence and we were up in the tree filling our shirts when he came out into the garden with a gun.
Oh my.
And we were up in the tree and he started to talk to us. That was sort of scary. I always felt bad about that because not long after that, if I remember right, he shot himself.
Really? Terrible.
Anyway, I think that's in my younger days.
How was it? What about Christmas?
I remember Christmas in those times because my folks, we had a nice house and we were dressed nicely, but that's all. We had no car. Everybody else had cars. But so I understood that my folks didn't have much, and I didn't ever want them to know what I wanted because they'd feel bad because they couldn't give me what I wanted. I would want, a nice electric train, a new bicycle, or something like that. And there was no way they could afford it, so I would never let on what I wanted. But then it was a little bit of a test when Christmas came. We did not have Christmas trees. We decorate our house a little bit with stuff and like cotton pattern, like snow and stuff at the windows, and we hang crepe paper things from it. Usually there was a light in the middle of the room out. And of course we had firecrackers those days, and once you get the dinner you pull them and eat the bag. But when you went to bed at Christmas Eve, you hung a bag on the end of your bed. Somehow it always had all kinds of things in it the next morning. But you try to stay awake and see Santa come, never ever would. And you wake up real early before it's light, and you don't want anybody to know you're awake. So you slink your hand into your bag to see if you can figure out what it is. And I still remember finding wooden blocks, just little building blocks. Oh no.
How disappointing that was, huh?
Not too exciting. But then I just have to be real grateful and always act real grateful for what I got. But it was really usually a disappointment. And I think at a real early age you have to be strong discipline about not wanting things, because if you want something then you can be disappointed. If you don't want, and then there's never a letdown. And it was such a strong thing that I know when I got to BYU, um, I remember a girl asking me something once, and I said, "Blessed are they that want nothing, for they shall never be disappointed." And she was so disappointed to hear that from me, because she kind of looked up to me as somebody who lived the gospel, and she was actually asking for a spiritual thought for a prayer meeting that night. And I shared my basic philosophy was, "Blessed are they who want nothing, for they shall never be disappointed." And I was kind of relieved to find out that was a part of President Benson's philosophy. He had protected himself that way. But when she was disappointed at me for saying that, it really stopped me in my tracks. I definitely believed it, and I definitely had used it. But when somebody who expected more of me showed a real disappointment in me and saying anything like that, then I really had to think it through. And I'm not sure if you want to know what happened because of that. But because of that, I left. I actually ran into her as I went to go clean out a mop in the back room at the cafeteria where I was working, and she worked in the snack bar. And we just ran into each other. They'd come and wring out their rags or get some fresh rags, and I happened to be in there cleaning the mop, squeezing the mop out. And when I'd said this the first time, and she acted so disappointed, it really stirred me. And later that day, I ran into her again, and I'd had a whole new experience. And I've since written it down, and some people always for copies of it. I don't know if you remember that. Well, it came to me this way, and then it gave her something really positive. I said, a long time ago, I started out on a street called Life, and I hadn't gone very far when I met this really nice lady. She was so nice to go with. If you walked with her and you held her hand, you just felt great while you were with her. Her name was Desire. Whenever you were with her, you felt like you could do anything. You just felt like anything was possible when you were with Desire. And I enjoyed being with her. And I had a lot of enjoyable experiences going with her. And then one day she invited me home. And I was excited to go home with her. As we approached her home, the front door opened and her kids came running out. Before she could introduce me to any of them, one of them looked really angry, ran and grabbed her mother's arm out of my hand and demanded her attention. And I was kind of shocked and embarrassed. And I didn't know what to do. And before Desire could do anything, I fled. And I really felt bad. And I decided I was never going to let that happen again. So I avoided that lady. I went up the back streets. I kept out of the main ways. I wanted to make sure I never run into her again. I was going to make sure I never went with her and had that kind of disappointing experience. And something happened to my life during that time. For a long time, I really missed her, but I made sure that nothing went wrong. But I had to stick in the back streets. I couldn't come out on the main street where it was bright and light. I spent my time in the gloomy streets. But one day I was careless and I wasn't very careful. And I wasn't watching, and I came around a corner and I ran into her. And she extended her hand to me and I just couldn't resist. She put out her hand, I just took it, and I just felt so good. It was the first time I'd felt this good in a long time. And I went with her that day, and it was so much better to be with her than in the back gloomy streets. And then I had a haunting fear that she would invite me to go home with her, but I just tried to ignore it. And she did. And I was enjoying being with her so much I couldn't give up. I was afraid, but it was so nice to be with her after such a long time of not really being with Desire that I couldn't resist going home, taking a chance. And she took me home with her. This time when we approached the house, no one came out. And she took me in. And when we came inside, she introduced me to her family. And she really had a neat family. She had a big family. She told me their names. She went around the room. And they were success, accomplishment, motivation, achievement, energy, courage, determination. And then she got to the one in the corner who I recognized. And then I realized that if you want success, if you want determination, if you want courage, if you want accomplishments, you have to go with desire and you have to learn to live with disappointment. Anyway, that was what happened because somebody challenged my negative approach, and occasionally I've used that and it's meant something to people. Somewhere I have it written down. So as I was learning and wanting, and I dreamt of having a tank. I wanted a tank so that those kids who would beat me up would be afraid of me and I could just go anywhere I want. And if I wanted to, I could just roll right over their houses. I dreamt of building tanks. I tried to build carts and stuff. Anyway, those were fantasies.
Sounds like you should have been an engineer, Dad.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time drawing, designing vehicles and trying to build them. Built boats. We would get corrugated metal that's like this. And get a hammer and hammer out all the curves in it. And then fold it over on a piece of wood and nail it and pitch it and another piece at the back. Then we drag that across the field, the heavy thing right down to, we have these really stinky creeks because of the runoff from the mines. Really polluted. I mean, they're just sewer lines, really. It's not really sewage in them, but it's chemical.
Sulfur.
Yeah, gross looking and smelling. And then go down and try and float our thing in those things. Slide around in the mud on the clay and stuff. In the weeds with the birds. Sometimes we get sailing. I remember we got way out on a lake and there were, I'd forgotten about this, there were coots. They're birds. And I don't remember trying to kill birds twice. One time, cousin brought a pellet gun and I shot a bird and it just nicked its little skin that goes down over the beak here and knocked it down to the ground and it was just fluttering and I felt terrible and I had nowhere to, I didn't have a knife or anything. This thing was just fluttering around and we had to kill it. Beat it to death somehow.
Oh, gee.
That was the last time I ever hunted. I remember with the coots, we rode around this little lake, really a pond of some kind, maybe a mile around it or something. And in the winter, it was cold. Caught a coot. What do we do with it now? Try to kill it. In our hands, we tried on the metal on the side, we tried to cut its head off.
Oh, gee.
But it was so tough, they were tough. Finally, we just let it go.
Oh, God.
And those are my younger years.
It's on.
When I think of my brothers and sisters, there's quite a gap between us, with 4 years between Marlene and I. It wasn't much we ever did together. Unless it was the whole family doing something, like going to a park or stuff, but never really had fun with them that I recall. I just remember babysitting and Molly wouldn't do what I told her, and I tried to smother her with a pillow. But she would just mock me and couldn't stand it, and I put a pillow over her head. She'd scream. I really don't remember them because the gap that existed. I know we'd go to the parks, and remember Brian was 10 years younger than me, and so he liked to hang around the big guys. He was always interested in our bicycles, or when I had a motorcycle, kind of a motorcycle scooter, then he was sort of interested in those things. But it seemed like it was in a class society. The brothers and sisters were in a different class. They just didn't do anything with it. And we had all cousins that were born in each generation. They're like 3 or 4 years apart. And with 9 sisters living in the same town, or 8 sisters, with all these kids being born, and they would get into their groups. And so when Marlene grew up and Beverly grew up, I related to them quite well. Went on vacation, and we went on a camping trip. And my cousin and a friend of ours, and Marlene and I went on a trip. Marlene went with us on a trip. But Beverly and I related quite well, and then she went to art school and she needed a way to get into town. And I had bought an engine, a bicycle with an engine on it. Well, it's called a moped, a Vicky, Czechoslovakia, like a Vicky. She would ride with her big portfolio case, whirling in the wind to town. I gave her that to use for school, and I got a motor scooter. But I honestly don't remember. It's an interesting thing that you'd asked that. I just don't recall doing things. All the things I recall was people on my level. My friends in the neighborhood, there were a lot who would gather around. There were new kids who came into the area, always came to me. Somehow I was the starting point. Because on the mines, it's kind of a strong culture. And you have the staff quarters, married quarters, you have the snobs, and we weren't gangs in the militant sense, but you had to belong. You had to be in the in-group. And I usually attracted or had gathered around me the really nice kids, not the non-violent mainly. Occasionally I'd have somebody who was a little weird.
A pyromaniac or something.
But I had friends who were quite good. They'd come to me to learn to play tennis, and I teach them to play tennis, and some of them really learned to play well. I remember Jan Besaidnout, he came from an Afrikaans-speaking family, and he was sort of the youngest of the whole family, and he was just sort of the brat of the family. They didn't want around, they just give him money and stuff to keep him out of their hair. And he came to me, and he was a natural athlete, and his family didn't play any sports at all. I remember how well he learned to play. And he'd get a car, take us for rides in it, and scare the heck out of us. I remember the old Kaisers. There used to be a car called a Kaiser. And he would get us in that Kaiser. And I remember us doing 85, 90 miles an hour.
Oh my.
He had a motorcycle, and we were riding on the back of that. One of my nicest friends was a fellow by the name of Tini Fillion. Tini came from a really nice family, quiet, conservative family. He went to Afrikaans high school, but we were good friends. He was a clean-cut kid, not up to mischief at all. Just needed a friend. He learned to play tennis with me. And something else I was going to say about Tini. Still wonder what happened to those guys. I'd like to look them up.
Mhm.
Teeny for you. Oh, he could kick. He could kick a football. He could place kick a rugby ball from halfway right over the posts. Halfway down the field.
Wow.
50 yards over the posts.
Should have come to America.
No. He was quite a big kid, nice husky kid, nicely built, good looking. And he could really hoof the ball. There were three of us that were together a lot. There was Teeny, and then there was a young guy who was much younger than me. A lot of people used to gather at our house. Our house was kind of a gathering place. Even the black kids who were on the run from the police used to hide in our yard. They were friends of Brian's. They'd hide there. And loitering types, because they'd have black policemen patrolling all the time to make sure that there are no burglaries and stuff. And so if they saw young kids, black kids, they'd be after them and treat them very well. And they'd hide in our yard. I told you how I benefited from that.
So,
Well, one time I was coming home from school. I rode to school most of the year on bicycle, 5 miles on a bicycle, single speed bike. And I had to come across because the school was in town and we lived 5 miles out of town. And you had to go through the veldt or fields between the farmlands and stuff. And then along the railroad there were paths. One time when I was way out in the middle of nowhere, a mile or two from home, way out of the town, there were some black kids coming walking down towards me. And black kids, gang types you see together, we used to call it sortsies, because same as kind of hoods. And as I was getting close to them, they were on foot and I was on the bike. I could tell that they were interested in me.
in your bike.
And I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And then I heard one of them say, "Dis Brian se broer. It's Brian se broer."
His brother. Brian's brother.
Brian's brother. And I just got out the way and hit me through. So I benefited from that, from his relationship with him. Of course, the rest of the family did have fun with my things like my treetop house. And then this treetop house overlooked the field where they had the fireworks, and so on the night of the fireworks, those who were favoured by me, my family and some of my best friends, they were allowed to come up in my treetop house and watch the fireworks from there.
Mm-hmm.
And we even set off rockets from the roof of my place. And I had sort of a balcony upstairs. The inside of my indoor part I had lined with what do you call it here? It's that brown sack.
Burlap.
I thought burlap and canvas are the same. I'm getting confused. Okay, well that was burlap then around inside there. And we would use little oil lamps for lighting there. And I don't remember what happened, but I was up, a bunch of us were up top, and something fell over inside and set fire to the burlap. And the smoke was coming up through, and we knew we were in trouble. The only way to get down, we were far too high, because I think we were 15 feet, the floor was 15 feet off the ground. And I had a ladder against the tree. You'd come through the floor on the inside, and you'd have to come out of this, and then you'd hang down, and you could just barely reach the ladder, and then you could get on your toes, and then you climb down. Well, I got everybody out, and then when I went, it was so smoky in there that I didn't even stop. I just came through the roof and jumped right through the opening, you know, and the ladder wasn't there. It had fallen down.
Here.
So I was clambering on a tree, trying to stop myself, boom, 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 go down the tree.
Oh, gee. So did that burn your tree house down?
No, it didn't. It attracted a lot of attention, and I got the mine gave orders that it had to be dismantled.
Oh.
It was a hazard. It was the end of my treehouse. One of the things we used to do for fun is we used to buy squibs, and those are firecrackers. And we get a piece of curtain rod and knock a plug of wood in one end. And you drop a squid in, and you light it, drop it in, and you put a marble in. And then it would shoot the marbles. I remember shooting, actually penetrating through metal garage walls, the corrugated iron.
Oh, gee.
The marbles would really hit hard.
That would hurt.
So, that was the main escapades I think I got up to when I was young. The only other thing that comes to mind is silly high school birthday parties they'd have, and they'd have these kissing parties that I hated. And I would do my best to disrupt their whole atmosphere where they try to create a romantic atmosphere for people to kiss and stuff. I would lie on the floor and sing weird songs. This is when I was about 14 or so. Later on I also did the disrupting of the dances and stuff, but
Right.
the ones that you'd have somebody come to their house and they'd play post and all something like this. I just didn't, I couldn't stand it, and well, I'd only got invited once, I don't remember, so I didn't cooperate, so
Nobody invited you after that?
no. Never could get in the mood.
What were your favorite vacations?
Yeah, our big vacation was the one almost annually after we got a car. Even before we got a car, we'd ride the train down to Durban. And we lived up at 5,000 feet, and it was winter and it was cold and dry. But just 400 miles away was the ocean, and a warm tropical current came down the east coast of Africa. And so in midwinter for us, for them it was subtropical. It was really hot there in the summertime, but in the wintertime it was lovely. And we go stay down there, and my favorite one was we stayed in the Coogee Hotel. And all you do is you get up in the morning and they'd feed you breakfast. And then we go down and swim until you were worn out. You come back and eat and sleep. After you sleep, you go back and swim again. And you just do this day and eat, day after day. And we used to have long vacations because the mines always had at least 3 weeks vacation. And so when I was younger, that was my favorite, to go down there. And when I got older, we would go on our own and we'd camp a lot on the ocean. We wouldn't go to the commercial beaches like that because that's a big resort, Durban.
What about Kruger National Park?
Favorite thing for my folks was to take the missionaries to the Kruger National Park. I don't know if we'd ever gone on our own. We had to be just have a justification, so we'd take the missionaries. And I remember our car was hardly running, and so missionaries actually helped my dad overhaul the engine and rebuild the engine. And then we rode that. We'd go to the park, and my mother would give me steer a car. Missionaries would not realize how dangerous it was. And my mother would tell the stories of we'd come to a crocodile hole. You don't actually get to the river, you stop, and then there's a guide who carries an axe and a gun rifle. And the missionaries would be so eager to get to the water hole, they would rush with him, rush him down, and it might be 7,500 yards to the water through the jungle. And my mom would have the little kids, and she'd get separated, and one time she was separated, they were out of sight, and she heard this lion, home, right near, and he walked through across the path between us and them. Scared the heck out of them. That was always a fun thing to do, to go to the Kruger Park and stay in a stockade at night You go into the stockade, you had to get there before dark, and we'd stand as long as possible and race like mad to get in because you pay a fine if you get late, because if you're not in, they have to come looking for you. And I still remember as a young kid, one stockade, they were going to enlarge it, and before they expanded the stockade itself, they started to build new huts. They call these huts rondavels, which means round, thatch roof. And they'd started putting the walls up. And during the night we heard the elephants trumpeting, and the elephants came and just tore them all down. They didn't come in the stockade. They could have come into the stockade if they wanted to. And those stockades wouldn't have kept them up.
Right.
They tore down the huts right next to the other side of the fence.
Amazing.
It's kind of a scary night. But that's kind of an exciting experience to go into the Kruger Park and everybody's looking and hoping to see something, and there's a real anticipation as you come into a new park and you're looking around and wondering if there's anything, if we missed anything, if there's a lion or a cheetah. Suddenly somebody would spot and there would be a whole pride of lions, or a huge herd of impala, and huge, I mean, we would have, sometimes we'd stop an impala, there'd be a car like this and ahead of us or over us, and the impala would be coming, and they would be running. I don't know, maybe from something or what, but you could have 15 minutes of them leaping over your cars. It's beautiful, graceful, right over. Just watch this. Out of the bushes and over into the bushes and the barn. And I think the thing that I found most absorbing was to watch giraffe when they were on the road. They have a grace about them. It's just unbelievable. I was always astonished at elephant tracks, big marks like this, and the elephant droppings are huge, just like the bales of hay. It looks like hay too, the grass that's in it.
Right.
And, so,
Do you want to tell that story about the elephant chasing Granny and Grandpa even though nothing happened to you? Just for Tanner.
I remember one of the scariest experiences our family had, and they had a turquoise Austin A50 with a new car. It was really nice. And then they went to missionaries to the park, and they were following some cars along a trail. When the cars stopped, and then they saw an elephant coming towards them. And one of the cars raced by the elephant, made him really mad. So he started to charge our car, and there was nowhere to turn around. So you just had to put it in reverse and on the trail,
Oh my God.
back out of there without getting stomped on by him. There were people who, not that time, but who got their cars flattened.
Really? Did hippopotamuses ever get anyone?
I never heard of anybody having trouble with hippopotamuses. Since I left Africa a year back. Of course, I've heard of hippopotamuses biting people in the half and stuff like that, but not too familiar with one legend I heard that was really interesting. I call it a legend because the guy told me he saw it, that the crocodiles attacked a baby elephant. A crocodile grabbed a baby elephant by its trunk when the elephants were drinking, trying to pull it into the water. And they tell the story of the elephants grabbing the crocodile, putting the trunk and lifting it out of the water, and the elephant's going to a tree and pulling the tree apart like this, and putting the crocodile in there and then letting the tree come back and left
Squashing
the
it.
left the crocodile caught there in the tree. Now, I don't know if
That's
true
kind
or
of a
not.
weird thing.
They would know how to put a thing in there, but anyway, they are if you're collecting legends.
It's interesting.
There's some other memories I have of kids, like going to primary. Primary was in the middle of the week, and we used to go to my aunt's house. She was a member, but her husband wasn't. That was Ken Armstrong's mother, and he was a carpenter on the mines, and so he had lots of wood and stuff. And so part of going to primary was doing little handicrafts with wood and stuff like that. When I think of being a kid going there, it was catching the buses. That thing's blinking still. Is that supposed to?
Tape's almost out. We have 2 minutes left. Go ahead and tell that story.
But I just remember riding in the buses was an ordeal. I tended to get sick. I don't know how often I remember walking past the hedges coming home and the sun beating down on me, and I'm sick from riding in the bus. Either way, it seems like traveling was tough. And something that comes back to my mind is about that time when I was between 8 and 11, I think Pepsi Colas came. And there was always a wishing I could have a Pepsi Cola. I had tasted one once, but I found travel difficult, and I'd have to walk a long way between the bus stop to the house. And, it seems like that's only my memory of going to meetings, and I'd go to my grandmother's I have my piano practice, and then I'd go to my piano lesson. You just can't learn to play the piano, and you go there and the teacher tries to be nice, but you've only just been to practice, or you practiced the week before, and it's been a week since you practiced. Now you come in and try and play. It didn't work, and so I never learned to play the piano. But I think that's the only other thoughts I had. I guess going to church, we used to meet that's when I was a little kid, we'd meet in a dance hall where they'd have dances the night before. I remember us coming to first clean up when we got there in the morning, clean up the bottles, and often we had to clean up onions. I remember sour onions that were part of the leftovers from the night before. So church was beer and onions. And you clean it all up for the dance floor, and then when it's time to go to class, you'd go up into some kind of attic and you'd have your lesson up there.